welcome to the second episode of the Mel Coffman Show. Today's guest is a U.S. military veteran, a Harvard graduate, and he's currently Congressman for Texas's 3rd District. Please welcome Congressman Van Taylor.
Wow, great to be with you, Mel.
Guys, great to have you here today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, before we get started, I wanted to congratulate you on your big win and re-election.
Oh, thank you.
You're so welcome.
Well, it was great to have the people of Collin County speak with such a strong voice for my re-election. I was very honored to have their endorsement and look forward to working for all the people of Collin County. And while some of them may not have voted for me, I certainly will vote for them.
Awesome. So let me ask you, why did you initially run for Congress?
Well, 3 reasons. Laura, Helen, and Susie, my 3 daughters. I want to make sure that they have an America that's just as free, just as prosperous, with as many choices and freedoms as the America that I enjoyed.
So just for people who are unaware, what are your main duties as a congressman?
Sure. So I have the tremendous honor and privilege of representing 750,000 Texans in the United States House of Representatives. And so there are 435 members of the U.S. House, and we are one of the 2 branches of the legislative branch of government, right? So you've got a House and a Senate. And I represent most of Collin County, Texas, which is the county just north of Dallas.
Okay, so if someone were to Google the duties of a congressman, what would they see? Like, how would you break it down? Are there 5 core duties?
You're voting on bills, you're evaluating bills, you're assigning bills. So there's a legislative component to what you do. You're overseeing agencies. So for instance, I've got a hearing tomorrow looking at the different banking regulators. I serve on the Financial Services Committee. And you're also you're working on behalf of your constituents. So I work very hard to build my relationship with my community. I had 20 coffees with your congressman prior to COVID. During COVID, I actually had half a dozen telephone town hall meetings. I did webinars to help explain to constituents different issues like EIDL loans. I help constituents with unemployment benefits, with VA benefits, with immigration issues, with passport issues. And then I actually have a 100% meeting policy. So I've actually met with every constituent that's ever asked to have a meeting with me, and there's over 800 of them.
You know, I do believe that. I know that to be true. I have a little surprise for you. When the COVID epidemic first hit, the COVID crisis first hit, I wrote a letter to this very congressman, and I got a response back that was lightning fast. He answered every single question that I have in a 2-page response. So I can personally attest to just the sincerity of this congressman. And, you really have a heart. You understand the needs and wants of your constituents. And that's really reassuring as a resident.
Sure. Well, I appreciate that. And those needs and wants are not through mind reading. It's actually through hard work. It's through taking the time to have the one-on-one meetings. And some people are like, wow, Van, that's amazing. You've had over 800 meetings in your first 2 years in Congress. You're an incredible person. I say, no, what's incredible is I've got a district with 800 sets of constituents that want to sit down and talk to me about what's important to them. And that helps me to do a better job. And I'm grateful for every single person who picks up the phone, who writes a letter, who sends in an email, or sets up a meeting. I've got a 100% meeting policy, and I'm very proud of the fact that my constituents, their priorities are my priorities.
So as a congressman, you sit on different committees. I know that one of your committees is the Financial Services Committee.
Right.
What does that tell us about that?
Sure. So the plurality of jobs in Collin County are actually financial services jobs, primarily the banking and the insurance sectors. And the Financial Services Committee watches over insurance, watches over banking, watches over Fannie and Freddie, so the home mortgage market. So it's a very important job. We are all blessed to live in an incredibly prosperous country. Collin County is a very prosperous county, and that's a direct result of having good capital markets. And so making sure the capital markets work and work well and are fair, I think is important for the future of our country. Awesome.
Well, you are often called the bipartisan problem solver. Can you tell us why are you called that?
Sure. So I served 8 years in the Texas legislature. I was in the Texas House for 4 years, the Texas Senate for 4 years. And in that time, I passed 81 bills. Everyone was bipartisan. My desk mate, my second session of the Texas House was a Democrat. No one said anything about it. It was completely unremarkable that I would be bipartisan, working a bipartisan way. When I got to Washington, I kept doing what I've been doing. I kept working on that winning combination of voting my conscience in my district, but also being willing to reach across the aisle and shake hands and work on a bipartisan basis to solve a particular problem, whatever that problem may have been. And after a few months, the Dallas Morning News reporter pulled me aside and said, Congressman Taylor, I see you're talking to Democrats. I said, well, yes, I am. He said, so what's that about? And he was kind of shocked. And I was sort of taken aback. I was like, well, I'm just doing my job. I'm doing what I should be doing, which is building relationships on both sides of the aisle. And actually, I still do it, a conscious choice of spending half my time on the Republican side of the aisle and half my time on the Democrat side of the aisle. And it's unfortunate that Congress even has that denotation. There is no such denotation in the Texas legislature. And actually the Dallas Morning News wrote an article. It was a front page headline that said Van Taylor, Mr. Bipartisan. And I'm proud to work on behalf of my constituents and to reach across the aisle to do that.
Awesome. Well, as a congressman, how did you respond to the initial onset of the coronavirus crisis or epidemic?
Sure. Well, obviously, this has been an incredibly challenging healthcare crisis for our country, and it's led to an economic crisis. And my office and I worked around the clock. We burned the candle at both ends. Starting early, staying late, working hard. We were working remotely, but we were working to help our constituents get through an incredibly difficult time. We helped people find testing sites. We helped get constituents who are trapped overseas get home. We helped people get PPP loans. And one thing that is a state responsibility, the unemployment benefits. We actually worked to help people get their unemployment benefits, even though it's not technically in our lane. We just saw there was a lot of need. A lot of people were calling about it. We said we're going to go step in and help our state legislative colleagues and we went and helped them and helped hundreds of people get their unemployment benefits. And our mission was to help every family we help to get something from the food bank or make a rent payment or get an unemployment benefit or a business to get a PPP loan. Our community is that much stronger, that much more able to get to the other side in a much better position, I think, to recover from COVID economically.
You said something that really piqued my interest. I'm going to come back to the point we were just discussing.
Sure.
You said that you helped get people home from overseas.
Sure.
Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, at the beginning of COVID, a lot of flights got canceled. And I have a very cosmopolitan district, a very diverse district, and we had families in Pakistan, in Ukraine, in the Philippines, in Vietnam, Europe, in Morocco. I mean, every continent and dozens of countries around the world who thought, "Hey, I'm getting home on such and such a flight," and the flight was canceled. And they then needed help to get out. And so my office worked in conjunction with the State Department and the local Collin County family or resident who was trying to get home. And we helped them get transportation to get back to the United States. It is a really wonderful thing when you can call a family and say, "I'm so glad you're back together," because it's a very worrisome thing when a family member is trapped overseas and there's an international pandemic and you literally have no idea how they're going to get home.
One of the things that I really respect about you is your understanding and concern for small businesses. One of the questions that I was going to ask you for families and small businesses that may still be struggling due to COVID, we kind of touched on this, but specifically, what are some of the resources that they can go to and where can they be found?
Sure. So we worked in the initial parts of the pandemic. So last spring on the PPP loans, we worked on EIDL loans. If you live in the 3rd District and you need help with either of those two programs or any other questions you may have, there are definitely some tax questions that we're getting. And we'll do very specific work to help people get clarity from whether it's the Small Business Administration, whether it's FEMA, whether it's the IRS, to try to help those businesses understand the environment they're in, understand the questions and expectations they may have. We're currently working on on some loan forgiveness issues with the PPP plan. But it is dynamic. I mean, as issues arise, that's what we're working on. And again, we're responsive to the community. So the community brings the issues forward, and then we then dig in and help. So, for instance, early on, there were a lot of questions about EIDL loans. We actually brought in one of the key guys who, here locally handles EIDL loans. And we actually had a whole webinar. And it was designed for the people of the 3rd District, where we watched, this YouTube video was watched literally around the country as we were explaining that particular program.
Okay, I do have a question. It's related to what we're talking about. Sure. The stimulus package. Do you think there will be another stimulus package? So as part of the problem, I'm a member of the Problem Solver Caucus, which is 25 Republicans, 25 Democrats. And at the end of, we were under the expectation that toward the end of July, there would be some kind of CARES 4 package. And when it didn't happen, I joined a working group, about 12 of us, so 6 Republicans, 6 Democrats within the Problem Solvers group. And we worked very hard. We met for about an hour every other day through the month of August, came up with a package, rolled it out in the beginning of September. And it was actually written up, I think, in the New York Times and the Washington Post. Is like, hey, this is a good plan. This is something we should do. The president said I could live with the parameters that the problem solvers have proposed. And I think the important thing about having us endorse it, because it was the entire Problem Solver Caucus, all 50 of us that endorsed it, is it showed you the votes were there for a CARES 4 package. And it didn't have every single detail ironed out, but it gave you the wickets of what could happen. And what the votes were there for to do in the U.S. House. And actually it was interesting, in the middle of the press conference for that, Speaker Pelosi said, we're not going to leave town until we get a CARES 4 package through. And then she had us leave town without a CARES 4 package, which was very disappointing, I think, for all of us. I'm currently having conversations working on seeing if there will be a CARES 4 package. I think that there's some reluctance to go ahead and do that. So I would encourage no one to hold their breath for that. Okay. That's exactly what I wanted to know. So you're local. You're from the Dallas area.
Right.
Correct?
Born in Dallas.
Awesome. So what are your long-term plans for District 3, Texas?
Well, the 3rd District has its own unique challenges. It's an incredibly successful community, right? It has good schools, some of the very best schools in the country. It has safe streets. Plano is the safest city in America. And it's safe streets, good schools, new streets, right? We're building roads. We're fiscally well run. The county is fiscally well run. The city's well run. The school districts are well run. And I think that's because you've got involved leaders. You have community members who join the leadership, they're joining the school boards, they're joining the city councils, they're engaged with their local people. And I'm a small part of a bigger team, right? You have legislators that go to Austin that change laws. You have judges. You have a really great courthouse in Collin County. But things that are on the Van Taylor list, the congressman's list for the 3rd District is making sure you've got roads, making sure you've got water, making sure you're building that next generation of roads, making sure you're building that next generation of water infrastructure. Making sure that the McKinney Airport, which is the airport in Collin County, will, because ultimately one day that's going to be to Collin County what Love Field is to Dallas County. Collin County today is a county of 1 million, but it's going to be a county of 3.5 million. So you've got to have that long-term view. And the other thing that I'm working on, and this is also a long project, is working on VA clinics, making sure I've got enough VA clinics. We've got a lot of great veterans in Collin County, and they deserve equal access to the VA healthcare system.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. Before I forget, I want to say Happy Veterans Day to you.
Thank you.
I understand that you're a Marine Corps vet.
Yes.
So I have to ask, what made you join the Marines?
I wanted to serve my country and make a difference. I wanted, I think, the leadership experience that came with being a Marine officer. And I certainly got all that. I had the tremendous privilege of leading a reconnaissance platoon on active duty, and then I was an intelligence officer for an artillery battalion. And I actually joined the Marine Corps Reserves while I was getting my MBA from the Harvard Business School. And my Marine Reserve unit was in Washington, so I'd actually fly down once a month, do my drill, and then fly back. As they say, spend your drill check on your flights. But I was in the unit I wanted to be in. And the last day of drill at my Marine Reserve unit, before I was literally going to come back to Texas and start working. Literally that last day of drill, I was planning to go to the Pentagon and grab lunch, but I never got there because that day was September 11th, 2001.
Really?
I watched the Pentagon burn with my own eyes. and made an oath to continue to serve my country and make a difference. And I drove back to Texas that day. And the Friday after 9/11, I was actually at another Marine Reserve unit, 4th Recon Battalion in San Antonio, Texas. And I actually led a platoon from 4th Recon Battalion into Iraq on D-Day, March 21st, 2003. The very first platoon into Iraq for my brigade. Well, they put the reservists out front because they know we'll do a good job. But we were blessed. We brought every single man home to their families, accomplished every mission, and I came home to the arms of the woman, sent me a letter every day I was there, and we're raising 3 girls.
You know, I have got a picture of you and your dresses. What's your uniform?
Dress blues.
Dress blues.
Yeah.
Your wedding picture. Your lovely wife,
Oh,
Anne. Yeah. So the audience will be able to see that.
Oh, good.
So yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
So back
she wrote good letters.
I can tell.
They're safely locked in chest. I'm not allowed to read because it might go to my head.
Oh, I love it. I love to hear that. I love to hear it. So what are some of your plans? You may have touched on this a little bit, but what are some of your plans concerning Veterans Affairs?
Well, I think, in Collin County specifically, we need to make sure that we're building the VA clinics. And so that's a long process. It sort of takes about 8 years from start to finish if a member of Congress is working on it. So we actually recently sent a letter to the VA talking about how we need another veterans clinics and pointing out the wait times for the clinic, the one clinic we do have in Collin County. And so I'm working on building, working with the VA, working with local governments to try to make sure we've got the sites and the resources to build the next set of VA clinics to take care of our veterans in Collin County.
I understand that there were some legislative changes where veterans could go to private doctors, that type of thing. How would that correlate with what you're doing? So
the VA Choice Act is contingent on people being far away, and most of the people in Collin County are not far enough away that the VA Choice Act would help them. There are some options to see private vendors, and I think that's a good thing because it creates more choice for veterans and their healthcare choices.
Okay, we can transition to a different subject.
Sure.
How do you think the GOP is connecting with mainstream America?
Well, I can speak for myself. I work very hard to connect with mainstream America. I think mentioned earlier in the show, I had last year, I had 22 coffees with your congressman. I had anywhere from 20 to 120 people show up to every one. That was a come one, come all event, and you'd be amazed how many mothers bring their kids to meet their congressman and get their picture taken, and that's all they want to do. And then I had a mom from Frisco, Texas show up and say, I'm having a problem getting my breast milk through TSA, and we actually drafted a bill and passed it out of the House. I could just get the Senate to do the same. But that actually came directly out of an engaged constituent showing up and saying, this is my problem, Congressman, can you help me with that? And so I work really hard to make sure that I have opportunities for people to come meet me. And then again, I have my 100% meeting policy. And so I work, and then during the course of the campaign, obviously knocked on thousands of doors and greeted thousands of voters at the polls and heard all kinds of things and gave them my phone number and said, feel free to reach out to me anytime.
Now, I can attest to that because I was one of those voters who ran into you at one of the polling locations.
See, I'm doing my job. I'm out there. I'm standing in the streets,
And he was kind enough to do a sidewalk interview with me.
Yeah.
Check out my Twitter page.
Yeah. There you go.
So I wanted to ask you, what are some accomplishments that have taken place in the midst of all this that you're proud of or just even working on?
Well, one of the things that I found when I got to Congress was not only the partisan divide, which I think we're all very aware of, but I also saw there's a cameral divide. There's a divide between the House and Senate. The interaction was very poor between those two chambers and still is really needs a lot of work. To me, as a state legislator, I saw a lot of interaction, which helped a lot of things get done because a bill's got to get through both chambers before it can get to the executive's desk to be signed. And so as a problem solver, we actually worked on building a formal working group with a group of senators. And actually, they formed their own version of the problem solver caucus over on the Senate side. So 4 Republican senators, 4 Democrat senators. One of the Republican senators, actually our own Senator John Cornyn, was very, very proud to have him join our team. And we're actually having bicameral meetings every couple of weeks to sit down and talk turkey, talk about issues, talk about bills, talk about what can be done to work together. And so I'm very proud of trying to build infrastructure to actually begin to have conversations to create interaction between the two chambers. Because that's, again, we all see the partisan divide, but there's also a cameral divide. And that cameral divide, I think, is much harder to see.
One of the reasons that I invited you into the show was to discuss that very issue.
Sure.
What can we do to, create some more unity, especially, within the GOP?
Right.
Something I've noticed, about the Democrats is there's a lot of uniformity there, right or wrong. They tend to stick together on issues. What can the GOP do differently? I know you kind of touched on it.
Sure. I will say that what I've seen in Congress is I've seen, at least within the Democrat Party, seen a real fracturing where you've seen a new socialist wing come up. They're nascent, they're burgeoning, they're powerful, they're well-funded, and they have a very different vision for America. And they are very much at war, not with the moderate wing of the Democrat Party, but with the old-line liberal wing. And so you're watching true blue, 100% pro-choice, Green New Deal, impeach the president, Medicare for all, liberals be defeated by socialists, and the squad will be almost twice as big when it comes back next Congress. There'll be more socialists in the new Congress than there were in the Congress that I'm in now, and so I think you're seeing a rise of the socialist wing of the Democrat Party. And that in turn is creating a lot of strife within the party, and so I think it's going to be enormously difficult for Nancy Pelosi to govern with the Democrat caucus as ideologically divided as it is, because it's a much further gap because the left has moved out so far it's pretty wild when an old line liberal is, you're not a socialist, we're going to remove you. And that's how AOC won her seat. That's Ariana Presley. That's how she won her seat. You watched a congressman in Missouri, another one in New York City, who were old line liberals to have taken out by socialists.
What I've noticed with Democrats, this is the way I see things, correct me if I'm wrong. What I've noticed, people 35 and older tend to be Democrats, and those 30 and under tend to be liberals/socialists. Why is that occurring? And are you saying the same thing?
I can't tell you why it is occurring, but what I can tell you is that what we've done in Collin County has been very successful, right? We have a fiscally conservative county. We have one that we have good schools. We're funding our police. We have safe streets. We're building roads. It is a very successful community. And I'll give a good example. You look at, if you're a low tax environment, when your tax revenues drop, it actually is not as painful as it is in a high tax environment. When the revenues drop, it's very painful. The example, I'll just compare Texas to California as the two most populous states in this country. Texas, they think they've got a $4 or $5 billion budget shortfall, $4 or $5 billion budget shortfall on a $230 billion budget. California thinks that on a $141 billion annual budget, they have a $50 billion budget shortfall. They're in a terrible position fiscally. Now, Texas's government's $4,200 ahead. California's $6,500 ahead. So that's being that much more expensive on that much more tax burden. Very difficult to keep up when you have a downturn. Their response to COVID, another example, much more draconian, generally speaking, in the blue states. I've had many businesses call from blue states and say, we are leaving. We can't take it here anymore. We're coming to Collin County. You're the future. You're well run. You're well managed. You're the kind of place we want to be. We're not going to be in this blue state that I've been in for my whole life, that my kids live in, that my kids were born in, that my grandchildren live in, that I built my business here, but I can't do it anymore. I'm leaving. And I think the next shoe to drop is next spring. You're going to watch most of the blue states implement massive tax increases, historic tax increases that will then in turn cause, and they'll be targeted to the businesses that are left. And many of them will say, we're done. So I think you've already seen a beginning of a wave, but I think it's going to get much bigger next summer as people kind of assess, wow, it's about to be brutal. I'm leaving.
You know what, I've been noticing these types of transitions going on since the early 2000s, 2005, lots of Californians coming here,
Sure.
different corporations. So it's phenomenal how you're running the district,
Sure, well.
it's staying red. So
Right.
I have to commend you and all the other elected officials for that.
Right.
Because when people come, they often bring their old mindsets.
Sure.
And
well, and I would challenge that conventional wisdom a little bit. I think the surprising statistic is in the exit polls. Ted Cruz won. That's CNN's exit polls. Ted Cruz actually won the transplants, and he lost the native Texans. And my takeaway from that is that the native Texans, if you grow up in a AAA bond rated state that has well-funded pension funds, that is building roads, that has good schools, that has safe streets, that has built enough prison beds, that has funded its higher education system, that has water infrastructure, you then in turn think that's the way it is. But if you come from Chicago, right, and you come from a place that isn't funding its pension funds, that isn't building new roads, that has a high tax burden, that doesn't have safe streets, that doesn't have where the schools are not as strong, you come to Texas, you say, this is special, this is different, this is different from what I came from, and that's true for people from almost all the blue states. Sadly, I mean, I wish they were successful states and they had funded their pension funds and built roads,
right.
and they had low tax environments and were regulatorily friendly to businesses. We are, and I wish they would be too.
Well, let's get to the fun stuff.
Sure.
What are your thoughts on the current presidential election?
Well, we absolutely want to see a fair election process, and I think that's in everybody's interest. Every American wants to see that whoever's elected, there's no question that they were elected, and so I'm hopeful that we'll come to a conclusion quickly, and that there's no question who the winner is at the end.
I understand a couple states, Alaska and what was the other one, have reversed their decisions, and we're trying to be neutral until votes are certified. How did this all come about? This whole voter fraud thing?
Well, I think what did happen over the summer, because of COVID, a lot of states changed their election processes. Here in Texas, we expanded early voting. We went from 12 days of early voting to 18 days. So that's 50% more days. We actually added over 60% more hours so people could vote. And we had one of the greatest turnouts we've ever had, really, really off the charts voter turnout. Other states started mail-in voting for the first time. You look at New York State in their primary. I mean, one of my colleagues in Congress didn't know for 6 weeks whether or not he won or lost the primary. I don't think that's nefarious. I just think they implemented a new system that they really didn't know how to run and just didn't go very well. And so, Texas, I think, we have a reasonably good system. We were able to quickly figure out what had happened because of the way we run things. But some of the states, they implemented some things that didn't really work out very well. I think Nevada implemented mail-in voting 90 days before the election, and they just didn't have enough time. They're really behind the 8 ball trying to figure out how to make that work after it already happened.
So what are your thoughts on how mainstream media is covering this current presidential election?
Well, I think we're in a post-nonpartisan media world. At the beginning of the Republic, media was partisan. It was Whig, or what we now call Democrat. Right? It was one party or the other. After the Second World War, you watched media become nonpartisan, and that was something that we kind of expected and understood. And then in the 80s and 90s, there's media bias. But I think you now see that the media outlets, many of them are truly partisan. They're pulling for one team or the other. And I think the sooner that you sort of accept, okay, we've gone back to what we used to have. We're in this post nonpartisan era in our media. I think it'll be a little less upsetting because otherwise you're throwing stuff at the TV saying that's partisan. Well, yeah, it's partisan because they are partisan.
True. Well, I have to ask you this question.
Sure.
What do you like best about being a congressman?
It is so phenomenal to get to meet so many of my constituents and get to hear from them and to work for them and to carry out their will. It's sometimes hard to divine, but it's really the people that is the best part of it. It really gives me a lot of energy. It's energizing to get to be with so many people.
Well, Mr. Congressman, personally, you already know that I
You
think
can
you do.
call me Van.
Okay, Van. You know that I think you do a phenomenal job.
Oh, thanks, Val.
I love where I live, and you're a big part of that. As our congressman
Sure.
for District 3. So we're going to be wrapping up here,
Yeah.
and I want to thank everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on the Mel Coffman Show. Thank you, Van.
Thanks, Val.